Bundesliga kicked off again?
Well, first of all, I enjoyed watching some live football. It was good. Obviously, it was a little bit strange seeing the stadium and the substitutes sitting apart with masks on and coaches and so on. But overall, I think it was a good sort of reintroduction of professional sport, top level sport. And clearly it went as well as I think it could have done for the Bundesliga and the teams in it. So well done to them. And obviously we look to learn from them as much as we can as we move towards that stage ourselves, hopefully in the not too distant future.
You've got a couple of players out on loan in Germany. You've also got a couple of players who you only recently sold to clubs in Germany. I wonder if you've spoken to any of them about how it was for them, and if there's any lessons that you can pick up early.
Not personally, but we've seen Uwe Hunemeyer's comments. He was playing for Paderborn in the games at the weekend, and again, I think most of the players seem to be consistent on how important it is to adjust quickly to the surroundings and the stadium environment. And certainly we'll be monitoring over the next sort of course of the next few match rounds, how that evolves and how people adapt to it. But overall, you saw that the games were competitive. They were a little bit sort of slower, perhaps, or at least appeared that way at first. But players have been, relatively inactive for a long time, and that's one of the challenges we know that we're going to have with our players. Effectively, they've had a very long layoff, longer, I think, in most cases, if not all cases, than they would have had in their entire careers. So expecting them to get back up to speed very quickly is going to be, is going to be sort of quite a challenge for them, which is why the next few weeks of training are so important.
Can you tell us what the manager felt about the first return to small group training?
I believe he was pleased. I think the attitude was fantastic. I think the work our staff had done to prepare the training ground and make sure it was as safe an environment as it could be for our players and our coaches was superb. And again, it's an adjustment, isn't it? Everybody's adjusting to something which they've never faced before. So each day that goes by, that adjustment will become easier. I don't like the phrase "the new normal," but we are moving to something which is quite different. But it will become normal very soon for the players. And we look forward to sort of working through the next stages, and hopefully, when it's as safe as it possibly can be, to getting back playing Premier League matches.
And just one final one from me. It's a year this week since you appointed Graham Potter. I wonder if you could remember the standout qualities he showed in the recruitment process, and what qualities have emerged for you over the past 12 months?
Well, first of all, we recruited Graham on the back of Chris Hughton doing a fantastic job for us and getting us promoted, and then keeping us in the Premier League. So we had a very firm foundation on which to build. Graham is different. He's got different ideas, has a different sort of style of play, and has taken his time working with the players to evolve that style of play. And I think our fans have seen that. Graham was the first to say to us that, we're not going to see overnight results that are going to hugely make a big difference to our league position. But what we will see is players adapting to that style of play and learning how he needs and wants things done over a period of time. And I think, all the things that we expected from Graham, we've seen. He's honest, he's hardworking, he's got a good sense of humour, he's a team player, he shares the club's values, he's got a particular football philosophy that we liked, very much when we looked at what he did at Ostersunds and then again at Swansea. And all of those things, along with the staff he's brought with him, have fitted really well into the club. And we've been really pleased with what he's done this year. We knew, and he knew, that the step up to the Premier League for him was going to be a real challenge, and it has been. But we've got some fantastic results this year. We've played some really good football. We've been unlucky in games. We probably could be and should be a few more points better off than we are. But the league table after 29 games is the league table after 29 games, and we're still very much in a battle. We know that, but we're looking forward to playing out the season when we can, and hopefully securing a full successive season in the Premier League.
Hi, Paul. A couple of questions to you both, if that's okay. Paul, the Premier League on Monday announcing 6 positive tests from 748 and saying that 3 clubs were involved. Watford and Burnley were 2. Brighton the 3rd. Have there been any more positives at Brighton?
Our policy, Jez, all the way through this has been to announce if we have positive tests. So if there was no announcement, it means no positive tests.
Can I ask you how encouraged you were by those figures, though? Only 6 from 748 is pretty good, isn't it?
I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, so I can't really answer that with any authority. It feels as if it was a low number. Obviously, any positive test is worrying and concerning for the people that have had that positive test. And, again, that, all of those people with rival clubs, but we wish them all the best and hope that they, recover quickly. But it was certainly it seemed to me a good start to the first stage of the training protocol that we've all returned to.
And you've touched on the return to small group training. Have all the Brighton players been on board, given that there's some other clubs like Troy Deeney and N'Golo Kante refusing to train? They're uneasy still. Are all the Brighton players on board, or have any refused to come back?
No, we've done the best we can to make sure that our players have not only been involved in every step of the process, but also have been free to speak their own mind on the process, either privately or publicly. And so we've encouraged that dialogue between the players and the coaches, the players and Dan Ashworth, the players and myself. We checked before we voted on Monday that the players were fully on board. So we went back to our 2 senior representatives, Captain Lewis Dunk and Glenn Murray, and made 100% certain that they were comfortable with everything they'd been told and everything they'd seen, and they were. But it is the first stage, and it's really important that as we move to stage 2 and stage 3, larger groups and contact and obviously playing, that we bring the players with us. At the end of the day, the players are the most important people in this process now, and we've got to make sure that their fears are allayed wherever possible, that we make them feel as comfortable as possible, as quickly as possible, and that we continue to consult them at every single step and make sure that we give them the time to have all their questions answered. That's absolutely critical to moving towards the next 2 stages.
And a couple of questions for you as well, Hope. Hi, how are you doing? Just on the resolution of the WSL season, a few options seem to be on the table. Cancelling, points per game with no relegation, points per game with relegation, which would see Liverpool go down. What is your preferred option for resolving the WSL season?
For me personally, points per game with no relegation. I think it would be hugely unfair to relegate a team when the season, hasn't been able to be played out through nobody's fault, actually. So for me, the logical step would be, no relegation and perhaps promote one from the Championship.
And that would make Chelsea champions, even though they're second in the table now. You'd be happy with that?
I'd be happier if it was us, but as it stands, it's Chelsea. So, yeah, sure. I think it's really important that there is an outcome, certainly for Champions League places. I think the most important thing for me personally is not to relegate.
Can we ask you too about Phil Neville's successor? You've been saying recently that Jill Ellis is the woman for the job. She's obviously got the CV and the track record. Can you just explain and confirm that Jill Ellis is your selection?
Well, yes, of the names obviously that have been put forward, I would certainly say that Jill Ellis has the experience, she has the pedigree, she's obviously won the World Cup and the Olympics on several occasions. So for me at this moment in time, she would be the definite front runner.
Hi JC, ready
Hi
to roll.
Lovely. Actually, if we just start with you, Paul, you talked about the first step. What about the second step? And you said you were looking at the information, talking about liability, how far down that process, and what have you taken from that so far?
Well, we haven't got any details yet on that second step. So, that's something which the government will first communicate to the Premier League, and then the Premier League will then involve us. So at this stage, we haven't seen the detail of that. But obviously, that's something which we would expect to see sooner rather than later, because we need, as I said just now, to get the players involved and to get them fully comfortable with it. And then, of course, following that, I think very quickly will be the third stage, which will be the return to play. And all these things have still got to be, debated and discussed, not just with the players and the coaching staff, but also internally with our board, because again, as I said last week, the liability ultimately sits with us as employers, and we've got to make sure that from a health and safety point of view, that we take into account all of the risks that are involved in the next 2 stages.
And in terms of the women's game, I mean, the EFL have announced today that there will be relegation if the season can't be completed, non-weighted points per game. What have you made of their decision on that?
The women's game or the men's game?
The EFL, have announced in the last hour or so.
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, all the way through, we've said that, you know, first priority is to complete the season when it's safe to do so. Secondly, we want to make sure that it's fair. And thirdly, you know, that we're totally against relegation if the season's incomplete. And that's with us sitting outside of the relegation places at the moment. But with 9 games to go, anything could happen. And equally, you know, what we are very concerned about is that awful prospect of starting and then having to stop again, which none of us want. So for us, you know, our position's been very, very clear since the start of the process, and it hasn't changed at this point, Johnny.
We've talked previous weeks about the support for the women's game that the club has given. Just on a longer term point of view, the work that's being done on the women's hub, can that continue and can that resume so that longer term you can put that in place without any problems and not be impacted by what's happening across the country?
Well, first of all, you know, we remain as a club totally committed to women and girls football. It's one of the reasons why we hired, you know, one of the best women's coaches in the world to work with us and help us develop the game. Obviously, at this time, we're trying to conserve as much cash as possible because we you know, our income has been severely curtailed during this last 2 months. So, you know, we've paused all of our building works at the training ground. We're going to make sure that we obviously make sure that they're weatherproof and that we can survive through the remainder of this year. But as soon as we can, and as soon as conditions allow and financial conditions allow, you know, we'll continue with that work because it's really important. It's vital to give Hope and her group and the wider women and girls game a proper hub where they feel very much part of the club. And that is something we're totally committed to.
Lovely, thank you. Hope, lovely to see you again. First of all, how are the players that you've spoken to, how are they getting on through this very, very difficult period?
I think they've really done well, actually. It's been a long process. You know, is the league on? Isn't the league on? We've had to be very, very adaptable in terms of working from home, if you like, with programs. They've adapted very, very well to that. You know, as Paul's alluded to and said many times, any return to play, it has to be with the players at the forefront. You know, their health and safety is absolutely paramount. But they've adjusted quite well given the conditions they're having to work under, and all in good health and really in good spirits.
On a wider point of view, the government said that it's going to set up a task force. One former England international, Alex Scott's been named on that. What do you make of that idea and what impact do you think that might have?
Well, I think it's really important to solicit the views of people that have played at a decent level, understand the women's game, you know, so that they can, you know, be the voice, if you like, of the game of women's football. So I think it's really important that they've done that, and it's great to see that Alex Scott is part of that.
And in terms of your career, you've experienced a lot. What's this been like for you personally? How difficult and how challenging has it been?
It has been challenging. It's a very different way of working. I've spent, you know, the last 2 months on Zoom calls and, you know, calling players, having meetings through this medium. It's great that we can do it this way, and we've adjusted pretty well. For me personally, I've had to adapt, working from home. This, as I said before, this is the first time I've probably been in any one place for many, many years without having to travel. So it gives me a good chance actually to reflect, refresh, and you know, when we're ready to go, I'll be ready.
Paul, can I ask you about the next stage? I guess it felt like a significant hurdle jump this week, getting to the stage where players are training in small groups, but how big a hurdle do you think the next one is, and getting players back in for full contact training?
Well, first of all, it's good to see Big Ben back in action behind you, James. I've been covered up for a couple of months, but it's back on the show, I can see. Yeah, I mean, it's been a very important step this week, I think, to see the small groups back. And I'm sure the players will appreciate that. It's not been a lot of fun, I don't think, training alone in your living room, in your garage, in your back garden, you know, if you're lucky enough to have a gym in a gym on your own. So I think just the small groups getting back together would have been a big lift to them. I think the next stage obviously is very, very complex, because that's where we take what is at the moment a relatively small risk, given the protocol that the government and Premier League have worked on very hard, to another level of risk, which involves contact potentially and larger groups. So it's really important that we see the detail of that, understand exactly how it's going to work, make sure our medics are comfortable, make sure our coaches are comfortable, and as we said before, make sure our players are really comfortable. And then once we've got that broad agreement across those three groups, then it needs to go to the boards of each individual club to make sure that they can accept and are willing to accept that liability. And again, I've made a point about that before, because it is a legal liability. It's a very significant responsibility to take the health and safety of your employees, and to make sure that you're not doing anything that compromises that. And that's probably our number one priority as a board, to make sure our employees are safe. And in this case, the players and the coaches are very, very much our employees. It's easy to think about our employees as being the guys that work in the office, but it covers the whole area of the football club, and that includes the players and the coaches.
And secondly, apologies if this sounds cynical, but are you concerned at all about other clubs potentially maybe hiding any positive tests? Because of course the Premier League only find out numbers and the player themselves, whereas you wouldn't know if another team did have positive tests. Do you think that some clubs may look to manipulate that if it gets to a point where there's a huge game towards the bottom of the table or the top of the table towards the end of the season?
I'd really hope not. I mean, we're playing in the biggest sport in the world, at the highest domestic level in the world, in the best league in the world, and we've got some of the biggest clubs in the world. And the standards of all of the clubs in the Premier League is extremely high, and I believe so is the integrity. So from that point of view, the Premier League have taken as much of the risk of that away by putting in place independent audits and so on. And that's something the clubs were entirely supportive of. There's no issue there whatsoever. But I think we've got a huge amount of respect for each other, whichever position we are in the league. And likewise, the professionals, the players themselves have got huge respect for each other. So, I don't have significant concerns about that.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Cheers, James.
Hope, can I just ask you a quick one about the WSL season? It looks like it will be curtailed. The government have said they'd like to see elite sport back on TV as soon as possible. Does it seem strange to you that the highest level of English football in terms of the women's game, there isn't necessarily a push to get that back as soon as possible like there is with the men's game?
No, I think you have to appreciate these are really unprecedented times, and we could never have foreseen this. I think what is really important is the health and safety of the players and staff. The FA has been in consultation with clubs in the last 8 weeks. And I think, it looks like it's going to conclude that, that the season will be terminated, but it is in the best interest of the players and the staff. So, no, I think if it goes that way, and it looks like it is, I think it's a sensible thing to do. We're not in a position where we can perhaps test players every 2 days. We haven't got the capacity of pitches. So we have to be really sensible and think about the person before we think about the sport. And that is the priority for me.
So just finally on that, you don't think that the Premier League or the FA should be financially supporting the likes of Brighton and other clubs in the WSL so they could get the testing, they could get the capacity, and they could ultimately get the season back?
I think what we're looking at, there's substantial losses across the game, isn't there? And I think the cost to get, the testing equipment, the PPE equipment, the medical staff in place to support the women's game and get all of those things and the protocols in place is a huge cost that nobody could have ever foreseen. And while, there's money at the moment being lost in the game, this is just an added burden that perhaps the game can't afford right now. And I think everybody would recognise that. So from my point of view, it would be sensible, if it is terminated. We're yet to hear for definite. And as I say, go back to the health, the well-being of players and staff. So that is the paramount. And if if we can't find the budgets given the climate that we're in, you know, we can't really put the blame on anybody for that. It is what it is, and we have to accept it.